On February 11, Huwaid Araf and Radhika Sainath were arrested in Bahrain after they attended an anti-monarchy protest with an American activist group called Witness Bahrain. The story of their arrest and subsequent release to the United States, told in a forthcoming piece from War News Radio, got me curious about how other activists in Bahrain continue to face human rights abuses under Bahrain's government. Earlier this week, Bahrain's National Commission released a report detailing their progress in implementing recommendations from the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, or BICI, which outlined human rights reforms in November 2011. While King Hamad of Bahrain claims that the National Commission's progress report is evidence of positive change, international observers and advocacy groups maintain the improvements are superficial at best. One such group is Bahrain Watch, an organization which launched a website called Government in Action to monitor the BICI reforms. On Thursday, I spoke with Bahrain Watch founding member Bill Marczak about shortcomings of the BICI reports, the Government in Action project, and whether cyber activism can really improve government accountability. What just followed the launch of your website is this progress report from Bahrain's National Commission. Can you talk about who the National Commission is and what came out in that progress report?
Sure. So there were, I believe, 19 members on the commission. The commission was established. The Bahrain National Commission was established, as part of the recommendation, one of the recommendations that the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry gave in its report, which was to establish a national, impartial, independent commission to implement the recommendations of this report. So the government, the commission, the Bahrain National Commission wasn't. I don't think you'd exactly call them impartial or independent, or even a national commission. The BC, or the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, specifically recommended that members of civil society groups and opposition political party members be included on the commission. So the way that was approached by the government in appointing the commission is, so they, I believe, they approached two members of Al-Wafaq, the main opposition group, individually and said, would you like to be on this committee? They didn't apparently consult opposition parties as a whole, or even Al-Wafaq's leadership before inviting their members. So the end result was that you had maybe 2 or 3 members of this commission that were really representative of the opposition, and maybe they weren't exactly representative of the opposition because they represent relatively minor groups, but 2 or 3 members that were even from the opposition. Yeah. But the end result was basically that the commission didn't seem to be particularly effective in ensuring that in implementing the recommendations. It seemed mostly that they were kind of just shuttling back and forth, sending requests for information to government committees, and the government committees were responding with here's what we've done, and the commission was like, great. So the end result was that they issued this report which claimed that I don't exactly remember how many recommendations they claimed they've implemented, because I've heard so many different claims on this. Some government officials say it's 90% implemented. Some say it's all implemented. Some say 10 of them are implemented, I think, and the rest are in progress. But in any case, they claimed that they had implemented a large number of these recommendations in this report. And the reality is that they took some steps on some of the recommendations, but the steps weren't really enough to implement the recommendations, and seem perhaps designed in some cases to just tick off boxes rather than really address the spirit of what the recommendation is getting at.
So in anticipating that, when you looked at the commission's makeup and its background, was that part of the impetus behind launching Government in Action, that there would need to be some kind of independent monitor? So that's certainly a good, that would have been a good idea, but that wasn't how it really initially came about. Initially, I was just kind of sitting around, and I saw the announcement of the commission, and I was like, oh yeah, they're not going to be independent. And then my thought process stopped there. I didn't think of launching the site at that point. It was only kind of later when I saw the government had launched their govactions.bh site, and I was reading through it, and I was like, yeah, I don't think they listed this action. I don't think that actually happened. Or they listed this action
okay, yeah, they did that, but that doesn't really address the recommendation. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if there was some way to independently monitor this without having to go to the government's basically PR site, which was designed to with the intention to convince people that the recommendations were being implemented, rather than provide an honest assessment about what was going on.
So what's exactly your process for providing evidence that something has been implemented or hasn't been implemented? Where do you find your evidence, and how do you verify it?
Right, that's a good question. So there's many different sources that we use for our evidence. One of the sources is just for example, reading papers, newspapers in Bahrain. Basically all the newspapers except one are pro-government. So even the pro-government newspapers are useful in some cases because they contain quotes from officials saying, for example, an official has been quoted many times, has been saying, there are currently like 48 police officers that have been questioned in relation to like 100 and something cases of abuse, and that number hasn't really changed over the past few months. But so in some cases we use quotes from newspapers. There's also Bahrain has one independent newspaper, Al Wasat, which has they don't have comprehensive reporting about the situation in Bahrain, but they have interesting articles from time to time that highlight things going on. Bahrain is an official gazette where all the contents of all the decrees and laws are published. So we go there to figure out the government might claim this law establishes an independent investigator to prosecute abuses uncovered by the commission, for example. And then you go look at the actual decree, and there's no real requirement for independence written into the decree. So you can that's one thing we do. Another thing that's very important is we rely on we don't necessarily rely on, but we use to a large extent video and images captured by activists and human rights organizations on the ground. And of course, we do some verification on this video as much as we can really do on these videos and images. Basically, there's a number of sources that we use. One of the things that I think is very interesting and perhaps distinctive about the uprising in Bahrain is that there's so much documentation. If you go on Twitter, there's many people posting videos and images and tweets. And furthermore, different areas in Bahrain, like different villages, for example, have these official news networks. So there's like a Twitter account that claims to be the official news Twitter account for a certain village, and they post pictures and videos and tweets detailing the events in the village. And there's some villages have more than one official account. So there's maybe about like a couple hundred of these accounts, and so we look at videos and images posted by all of them. For images, there's a couple of things that you want to verify with an image before you kind of use it to say that a recommendation is or isn't being implemented. One of the things you might want to verify is that this image was actually taken in Bahrain. And another one of the things you might want to verify is that the image is recent, the recency of the image. Basically what we do is we just use kind of reverse image lookup services. Like Google Images has a feature where you can put in a link or upload an image, and it'll search for similar images or even exact matches to the image. So we verify our images that way to make sure they're recent. We also, to some extent, both with images and videos, rely on the wisdom of crowds on Twitter and in forums to gauge whether they're recent and from Bahrain. So in a number of cases, there's landmarks that can be recognized in the videos as being in Bahrain. And also Bahrain riot police have a very distinctive uniform. So we can usually verify that just by visual inspection that these people are Bahraini riot police, or at least dressed like Bahraini riot police. And I think there's a very, from what I've observed, there's a very strong willingness to present an accurate depiction of what's going on amongst the protesters. So you'll often see forum posts or tweets where people will say, "Oh, no, this is old footage. Please delete it. We don't want to spread this." Or, "No, this is not from Bahrain. Please stop spreading this." So when we see something like that, obviously we don't use that. But by and large, most of the stuff does seem to pass these kind of like basic tests that we do. Another test that we use is is this footage, these videos or images, have these been used by a human rights organization in Bahrain? Like, have they been posted by them has this human rights organization vouched for the authenticity of this stuff? So that, for example, the Bahrain Center for Human Rights and the Bahrain Human Rights Society post videos and images. Also, Bahrain's main opposition party, Al Wafaq, also has a human rights division that sends out images and videos. So we look to make sure that these people are vouching for images and videos as well.
And so now you've collected this evidence, and how do you let people know, okay, this is, like, where do you draw the line between the reform has been implemented, it's in progress, it's inactive? You have a very nice system of symbols with some that are green, some that are red. How did you come up with that? Do you feel that it's effective?
So overall, you definitely lose some information when you summarize something as just being implemented or not implemented. You lose kind of some fidelity by just assigning like a Boolean value or something as opposed to text. But so the way we really do that is we look to see. So we read the recommendation, we see what is this recommendation trying to achieve. For example, if you look at the recommendation about police training, which says the government should implement a police training program immediately for members of the police, the NSA, and the BDF, which is the Bahrain Defense Forces, which is the army. And you look at that and you say, well, why did the commission issue this recommendation? Should we consider this recommendation implemented if we just know that there's a training program going on? Like, is that enough to consider this recommendation implemented? And what we're doing with the site is we're saying, no, we're not just looking at the letter of the recommendation. We're looking at what's the intent behind the recommendation. So for something like police training, the intent that we read behind that is, well, police should stop their abuses. They should stop using weapons like tear gas, for example, in an incorrect way. So, for example, the way they use tear gas currently is they fire it directly at personnel, and they fire it in villages, in some cases in residential areas when there are no protests, in some cases inside of houses. So when you kind of look at continuing actions like this, even though there may be some police training program going on, we haven't uncovered any sort of concrete details suggesting that there is one. But even if there is one going on, the presence of this continued misuse of tear gas and continued beatings during arrests and things like that would be indications in our mind that the police training program, if happening, is not effective in doing what the spirit of the recommendation is suggesting should occur. So in that kind of case, we'd say the recommendation is not being there's inaction or violation of the recommendation.
When I first looked at your website, Government in Action, it occurred to me that in many ways it's similar to kind of two trends in online media overall. The first is kind of like fact-checking, something like PolitiFact maybe, which has, rankings from true, mostly true, all the way down to pants on fire. And then there's, kind of this parallel but separate trend of cyber activism, so-called Twitter revolutions. So I'm wondering, first, do you see this website as fitting into a fact-checking kind of paradigm?
So certainly there is that kind of aspect to it with the government in actions piece. We're rating things, as you said, whether with regard to implementation or non-implementation. So certainly there's that aspect to it. When I first when I was working on the site, when I had the idea for the site, it wasn't necessarily to just be kind of like a fact-checking place. We don't necessarily want to say this is true, this is false, because how do you have to kind of think about why would people believe when you say this is true, this is false. So what we're really trying to do is a combination of I guess fact-checking, to assign a value to each recommendation, but also to kind of explain our thought processes and methodologies behind it, and at the same time kind of raise awareness of the situation of what's going on in Bahrain. So raising awareness is definitely a key component to the site, which is why we have, for a lot of the recommendations, we have images and tweets and videos that that kind of like paint a picture that we hope of what's really going on, so that people who might not otherwise know. For example, members of foreign governments, journalists, et cetera, can kind of go here and have kind of like a one-stop shop to see exactly what's happening in Bahrain, in addition to finding out what's happening with the recommendations, whether they're being implemented or not.
And so the second trend that I mentioned was the idea of cyber activism. The Bahrain says its goal is to harness the power of social media and cyber activists in order to hold governments accountable. And so you're currently a doctoral computer science student at UC Berkeley. Right. So do you see yourself as someone who from California was able to get involved in a cause in Bahrain because of the same power of social media and cyber activism?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, I definitely think, social media and cyber activism have helped, launch the site and get it into the hands of, journalists like yourself, who are interested in this issue. So yeah, I mean, I think social media and cyber activism it's really cool, and I think it's been one of the defining features of the uprisings and revolutions that we've seen in the Arab world, and I think it's and even all across the world. And I think it's great to see people getting their news this way, bypassing traditional channels, which as we've seen in some cases with regard to the PR aspect of our site, are easily manipulable. So yeah, I mean, I definitely view what I'm doing as related to cyber activism in some case, in some sense, yeah.
Okay, well, so I have just kind of one last point, and that's that the overall message of government inaction seems to be that BC and the National Commission were this attempt to fool the international community into thinking that there's been human rights progress when maybe there hasn't been. And at the same time, you do recognize the nuance and that some of these reforms have been partially implemented. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, do you feel that the National Commission is a legitimate attempt to reform? And is reform possible without a regime change at this point in Bahrain? Well,
so I think So with regard to the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as there may have been, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not sure exactly what the intention was behind its establishment, but from when it was established, it seemed to be, a fairly, legitimate commission. There didn't seem to be any, catch to it. There didn't seem to be any, the commissioners seemed to be legit. So it didn't seem like that necessarily was an effort to fool people. And indeed, the report condemned the government quite heavily. So, if they were trying to fool people, they could have done a much better job.
Right.
So they issued the report, and then there was the National Commission. The National Commission seemed like, it was, just based on the makeup of the commission, it seemed like it was designed to kind of ensure that, nothing really major would change. That maybe, yes, we can, look like we're doing reform, but we're not going to, we're going to kind of try to adopt the approach of taking the minimum amount necessary to check off boxes next to the recommendations. So I think in summary the original commission wasn't an attempt to fool people, while it may have been an attempt to appear that they were doing something, and the implementation panel I think may possibly have been an attempt to fool people given the composition of the panel. With regard to your next question about is reform possible without regime change, I'm not sure. That's a very good question. If you kind of look at the history, at least over the past decade of Bahrain, if you kind of look at what was happening in Bahrain in the 90s with the uprising and what's happening now, and what happened in between was a new king came to power, King Hamad came to power in 1999. And promised this national action charter and ambitious reform program, and it kind of got off to a bad start when the king kind of unilaterally promulgated a new constitution, which was different than what he promised. And then ever since then, there's kind of been slow to no progress on reform. And I think as we saw with the crackdown after the February 14th protests, there's been really no tangible political reform in the past decade. So certainly the government has not really been on the ball in terms of political reform in the past decade. And I feel like the government continues to miss important opportunities. For example, when this Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry report came out, perhaps the king could have used that to say, okay, look, there's very serious abuses uncovered in this report, and I'm going to take immediate action. I'm going to replace the Minister of Interior. I'm going to replace the Prime Minister. I'm going to reform the government to make sure this doesn't happen again. Like take really concrete action really quickly. And he didn't do that. Instead, he kind of opted for this slow to no reform approach of this panel that was biased in favor of the government. So I think maybe reform is possible without regime change, but the evidence in terms of looking at past data points says no. So I don't really want to offer like a definitive conclusion on this because I'm not sure. But based on previous data, the extrapolation is that no, it's not possible.
All right, Bill, thanks for talking with me today. It's really been a pleasure.
Sure.
Bill Marczak is a founding member of Bahrain Watch. The group's latest project, a website called Bahrain in Action, monitors the progress of reforms proposed by the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry. For more information on the project, visit bahrainwatch.org. That's BAHRAIN.org. War News Radio is a project of Lodge 6 at Swarthmore College. For more updates on Bahrain and other conflict news, you can check out warnewsradio.org. That is, warnewsradio.org. You can also like Lodge 6 on Facebook and follow Lodge 6 Live on Twitter. Thanks for watching. For War News Radio at Lodge 6, I'm Amy DePiro.